Several years ago, a young girl named Megan came up with an idea for comforting the children of fallen police officers. She would make teddy bears using the uniforms of the officers who had died and give those to the grieving family members. From the beginning, there were those who objected based on anger toward or hatred of police. But response to the project was overwhelmingly positive. She made a lot of teddy bears, an unfortunate need, and had them distributed so far to 40 states. But in the last few weeks, the hatred for her and her work has intensified. The family has received verbal attacks from everywhere. Her father, who is a police officer, has had his life threatened, and the safety of the family has been threatened as well. They have taken this seriously and actually removed the identifying markers from their vehicle. Recently, we have seen chaos and destruction in large cities across America. Rioters breaking windows, looting stores, beating people, and even killing them, shooting down police officers on the street, running over them with a car. One individual even announced his intention to do so ahead of time online. And now, an area in the city of Seattle has been blocked off from official access after burning out the police precinct building, taking control of property owned by private businesses, the perpetrators proclaiming the area to be an independent nation. And we are left to ask, how? How does something like this happen? What is the driving force behind such expressions of anger, such hatred, such harmful behavior? All kinds of explanations or excuses are offered, from the political to the psychological, nearly always laying blame on others. But the Apostle Paul will not let people out of personal responsibility. He lays personal blame in Romans chapter 3 when he writes of all humanity, referring to Psalm 14 verse 3, "None is righteous, no, not one." And he describes human failings in the same chapter, referring to Isaiah 59 in this way. And you see if it sounds familiar. "Their feet are swift to shed blood. In their paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes." We are witnessing the harassed and helpless, harassed by opportunists who poison their thoughts, and helpless to resist the wicked impulses of their sinful nature. Yes, the problem is sin, and the solution is Jesus. You see, there's an insight presented in the words of our gospel reading for today. Jesus makes an observation concerning his own people as he travels among the towns and villages of Galilee, teaching in the synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom of God and healing every disease and affliction. He had compassion on the people in the crowds because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Why was this, we might ask? Many towns and villages possessed synagogues where people would gather for Sabbath worship. This was, after all, Israel, though not quite like in ancient times. But these to whom Jesus sent his apostles, initially just to them, were in large part descendants of the people whom God had taken as his own to create, as our Old Testament reading says, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. From Exodus chapter 19. What had gone wrong? Well, for one thing, lots of years of history had passed in which the people had wandered from God's truth over and over again and had been called back by his prophets over and over again. They had been attacked by enemies, conquered and taken captive, eventually released for a remnant to return to the promised land. By the time Jesus was doing his work, the law and the prophets, the Old Testament scriptures had been completed and gathered together. The scribes would read from these in the synagogue. The rabbis would teach from them. But the doctrine of the Pharisees predominated. The people learned a system of rules so detailed and complex that it was nearly impossible for ordinary folk to follow it. And truthfully, we really don't know how many people just didn't bother to attend synagogue. Like many people today who habitually stay away from attending worship services. How many simply didn't believe? We don't know. Or had given up, simply given up, trying to live by the provisions of the law of Moses, let alone the hedge around the law placed by the Pharisees. What we do know is that these people were not getting the guidance they needed. Many years before this, the Lord had warned the spiritual leaders of Israel, the shepherds of his people, through the prophet Ezekiel. And this is what he had to say to them. It's from chapter 34. Should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. The weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, the strayed you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought, and with force and harshness you have ruled them. Ooh. Yet later, God offered this promise, just a few verses later. Behold, I myself will search for my sheep and will seek them out. I will rescue them from all places where they have been scattered on a day of clouds and thick darkness. And sure enough, he did when Jesus came. But it was not Jesus alone who proclaimed the gospel of the kingdom. He instructed his disciples to pray and then sent them out. In the face of this monumental task, Jesus urged them, well, you start out by praying. Pray to the Lord of the harvest to provide workers. Prayer is always important, especially in difficult times, in the face of challenges. Prayer for many to be brought into the kingdom, and for many to be led to serve it. But then he took action. He took these very ordinary men and he sent them to do something extraordinary. Fortunately, they already had a stock of knowledge and experience with the teachings of Jesus and with his own miracles. Now they were to go out in his name and in essence do the same. I can imagine it was something of a shock for the 12 to hear that they were being given the authority to cast out demons and to heal illnesses, and yes, also to raise the dead. But their purpose was to show the grace of God, his free gift of love in the person of his Son. To show the power of God to overcome the guilt of sin with forgiveness, to defeat the power of the devil in people's lives. Someday they would all go all over the world to proclaim the message of Jesus. But at this time they were limited to the true Israelites, not the Samaritans, who were a mixed people, and not the Gentiles, because God was keeping his promises to gather his scattered flock and to bring them together under one shepherd. Yet as the verses that follow our text show, even among the Jewish people themselves, the message of Christ would not be welcome everywhere. When it was rejected, the apostles were to leave, even knocking the dust off their feet, as if to say, good riddance to those who turned aside the salvation they were offered. Now, my friends, the law of God still stands. The words that God spoke to his people from the mountain as they were gathered to consecrate themselves to him. The 10 statements by which the Almighty himself had commanded people to live. Jesus would later summarize them all into 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. It sounds simple, but it is not. For in that love is first and foremost gratitude for the love God has given to us. His sacrifice to cover our failings. His tender care like a shepherd for his sheep. His promises for our eternal welfare. Love does not reject what God commands, but embraces it. Embraces it. It's instructive if we look at Martin Luther's explanation with each of the commandments. What we find is a negative and a positive with each one. A negative and a positive. And so when the commandment is, you shall not murder, the positive side of that is, you should help and support your neighbor in every bodily need. When the commandment is, you shall not steal, the positive side is, you should help him to improve and protect his possessions and income. When the commandment is, you shall not bear false witness, the plus side is that you should, regarding your neighbor, defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest possible way. We're not seeing a whole lot of that these days, are we? Defying authority when it is trying to keep order does not show God's love. Destroying the property of others, burning, looting, are all violations of God's love because they defy his will. But honoring those who sacrifice themselves for our safety and comforting the bereaved with emotional or material support, or building a teddy bear from a fallen hero's uniform. These things show love. Love for our neighbor, and they reflect the love of God in us. Helping others to clean up, to rebuild after a disaster, man-made or otherwise, also demonstrates the grace of God at work within us. For those who do not reflect God's love, it's important to take note of the Apostle Paul's reminder in our epistle reading for today. But it's a reminder for all of us, because we all fall short. In Romans chapter 5, he writes, Christ died for the ungodly. Oh, he died for not the righteous, but the ungodly. He gave his life for us, not because we were righteous and deserving, but while we were still weak. He writes this reminder that death spread to all men because all have sinned. And yet, Paul also writes, for while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. Much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. This is the message of the kingdom of God that we carry. It is not a formula for holy living. It is a solution for our unholiness. God's remedy for our sinful nature. There is no need to be harassed and helpless in the face of our own sins, immersed in a sin-broken world. Christ, our true shepherd, calls out to us and to the world around us in his word, in the teaching of his apostles, to find redemption and healing for the soul, hope and peace in him.